video, we're going to take a look at a Deutsche Bank research report that tells us what historically happens, looking at hundreds of instances, both in developed markets and emerging markets, in terms of the result after inflation hits 8% throughout history, on average through all of these different markets. How quickly does 8% inflation go back down, and how do today's consensus Cs compare to the reality of history? And has the reality of history changed? That is, were the 1920s, the 1950s, or the 1970s periods of high inflation any different from how consensus fares today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to address in this video, brought to you by Roman, but more on them later, and as usual, we'll have timestamps linked down below. Folks, let's get into this Deutsche Bank report because it is absolutely phenomenal. So, first, historically, in the last 18 months, economists have been failing to properly predict inflation's magnitude and direction. So in other words, the size of inflation has been substantially underestimated, and the direction of inflation has been underestimated. We thought the peak was March, then we thought the peak was July, now we think the peak is August. Hopefully, it actually is the peak. But the point is, economists have been vastly wrong so far. In fact, take a look at this. The Bloomberg consensus estimates for inflation are written out via these lines here. This would be expectations in December of 2020. Here is March of 2021, June of 21, September of 21, December of 21, March of 22, June of 22. Notice how every single time we're moving these estimates up, that is, economist estimates are moving up, but every X here marks what actual results were. And they were always higher than what economists were predicting. The actual curve has shown that economists have really failed at properly predicting this inflationary cycle. As a result, Deutsche Bank is trying to analyze, well, what happens historically, not what economists are predicting, but what historically happens when inflation hits 8%. Well, let's take a look. So, when we look at 318 global episodes of inflation hitting 8% going back to 1920, whether we split them into developed markets or emerging markets really makes very little difference. And so when we put them together, this is what we get. All sampled countries showed that once inflation hit an 8% level, it took through the median, so at the midpoint, it took this long, this many months for inflation to come down. So in this case, it took for inflation to go from 8%, roughly here, it took about 2 years or 24 months for inflation to get down to 6%. And it took 5 years for inflation to get back down to lower levels. In fact, here's 60 months, lower levels really sitting around 4 to 5%. Notice how we're nowhere near that 2% level, even 5 years after an 8% spike. It's very rare to get back to that 2% level, even in 5 years. It took the Federal Reserve in the 1970s 2 years to get from high inflation of around 18% down to like 9%. But then it took a whole nother 15 years to get down to 2%. But that's just one scenario in the 70s. Again, right now, this chart tells us 318 observations. We have a chance of maybe threading this needle and actually seeing inflation plummet the way economists are expecting. But economists are expecting that within 2 years or 24 months, as denoted by these dots right here, Bloomberg consensus, the gray dots being the European cycle, the red dot being the US cycle, we have about a 25% chance of actually threading this needle if these observations from 1920 hold true. We have about a 25% chance of actually being correct that inflation is going to plummet back down to below 4% within 2 years. 25% chance. But wait, don't stop there, because this is based on the 1920s. And Deutsche Bank actually gives us 3 scenarios. They say first we look at the 1920s. Then we run the model from the 1950s. And then we run the model from the 1970s. And what you're about to see is scary. But it's not as scary as hair loss. Cue the sponsorship from Roman. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor, Roman. Bald can be beautiful, but it's not always a decision you want to be forced into. So if you're looking for prescription or over-the-counter hair loss treatments, then you should consider Roman. Roman offers a science-backed treatments that are proven to help slow or completely stop hair loss, and in some cases even regrow your hair. So if you're like me and you hate the idea of sitting around in a boring waiting room just to end up having to spend money on a copayment and dealing with obnoxious insurance hassles, dude, I hate going to the doctor. Roman is perfect for people like me who have a busy lifestyle. But if you are also looking for real and proven hair loss results, then check out Roman. The process is completely discreet from start to finish, and you even get free follow-ups for ongoing care. Roman has fast, free shipping, so you won't have to wait to start fighting hair loss. Confidence starts from the top down. So go to ro.co/Kevin. That's ro.co/Kevin. And if approved, you'll get your first month of treatment totally for free and free 2-day shipping. That's ro.co/Kevin, ro.co/Kevin. Welcome back. So let's look at the samples now run from the 1950s and how realistic are our expectations that inflation is going to plummet like Bloomberg is estimating that it will and economists are expecting it will. How realistic is that when we sample all countries developed and emerging going back to 1950? Well, going back to 1950, you could see the median is this blue line here. And, we can actually see that our consensus right here falls off of the 25 percentile chance. That is, if this it represents here the odds of us this actually happening, we fall below the 25% chance of this happening within about 15 months. So in other words, yeah, there's a chance, still a small chance we could align with expectations for the next year, but we probably won't actually align with expectations if this chart has anything, has any truth to it today anymore, averaging out inflation to the 1950s. Again, showing that we're much more likely in the 24-month period to still be sitting around 6 to 8% inflation, and after 5 years, still sitting in the 5% inflation category. Yikes. But then, folks, oh boy, let's look at this since the 1970s period. Well, if we look at since the 1970s period, which was a period of fiat money, the observations look even worse. Out of 126 observations of inflation exceeding 8%, within 24 months, the median inflation fell to about 8%. On the low end, we fell to about 6%, which makes our rosy outlook that inflation is going to fall to 2 to 4% look pretty dang ridiculous right now. And that is not exactly what you want to see. And so unfortunately here, this is where you have Deutsche Bank saying that the disinflationary thesis perpetuated by folks even true like Cathie Wood, whom I'd like to agree with, seem wildly optimistic. And even though this 1970s period is heavily influenced by the Paul Volcker era, it is still one where we represent fiat money. And what happens here? Well, central banks' policies are likely to have to remain high, not just for longer, but for a very long time. And that's scary because that means more pain for longer. And that means not only is that real estate recovery, but that stock recovery going to be a lot slower than we might be expecting. And so I think all of this calls for patience. Stay out of debt, increase your income, DCA, stay away from speculation, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.